Hi, I'm Matt from HockeyReviews.ca, and this is the PGS XT1 pad review. We did the review of the blocker and the catching glove, so now we're going to look at the pads. Huge thanks to PGS Canada. You can see their Instagram and link to their website in the description, as well as PGS. They sent me this demo set so I could make content on it and do reviews on it. So that's how we managed to do reviews of the whole set. So a bit about PGS. So they are a company that basically takes specific ideas and partners up with manufacturers in Canada and the US. So their whole idea is to offer hockey equipment that isn't as expensive as the big companies. So their philosophy is kind of hockey equipment is getting more expensive, but quality is going down. So they want to offer high quality equipment or accessories, sticks and stuff like that at a lower price. Now, I said their stuff is made in North America, but the stick is made overseas. I wanted to just call that out so I don't get quoted on anything there. So like I mentioned, PGS partners with companies to make equipment. All their goalie equipment, so their blocker and catching glove and these pads, is made by Kenesky. So this is basically a Kenesky pad with specific foams in here that are unique to PGS and designs that are unique to PGS as well. It's going to be a little bit different than Kenesky gear, but it comes from the same factory. That is kind of what they're doing with their helmet too. So their helmet is made by Coveted, which I have one of those, but it has different carbon layups and a different foam package, I believe, in there. So it's a bit different than just the normal Coveted mask. Well, first of all, this is a 34+1, I believe, and it is just simply way too small for me. So wearing this, I had to kind of use the straps and everything to pull it up on my knee, so I would land more on the center of the block because I was falling off the top of it. I would basically need a 35+1 or maybe a +2. Also, the thigh rises were too short for me as well. You can see it in my footage of it from like net cam and stuff. I couldn't close my 5 holes because the pads are way too small for me. I was trying with it, but it wasn't a natural thing, as well as this curve really doesn't help with that overall size. So it wasn't the best pad for me, but it's a demo set and I understand that. And it doesn't really hinder my thoughts on the pad itself. For example, the factory mad pads I use are not my style and I would prefer it totally different. And I think I did a pretty good job of reviewing those. So that will kind of be the case here. So talking about this pad and the construction, the boot is a pretty, like you can see the angle of it too, it's pretty straight there. And it is pretty stiff. It's not like super soft or anything. I never felt it getting in the way, but it doesn't move a whole lot there. With that said though, the stiffness of this pad is very soft. So this is probably the second softest pad I've used in recently, eFlex 6 being the softest, but you can see how soft that pad is. There is an internal break here and a top, but honestly the top break feels like it's the one that's doing the most. And when we look like this over here too, it does move down here as well, but this one really does feel like it moves a lot. And we did do the thigh rise test on this, and we saw the results of the thigh rise test on this. Both of those results are because of these breaks in here. So this is kind of a softer style of pad, and something that doesn't necessarily meet my preferences, but it definitely has a market out there, and I totally understand why they're going with this, as well as the face and kind of the overall profile of this. It's like it feels like a big mix between a butterfly and like a hybrid softer style of pad, where it's a lot softer overall, but it still has like that flat face and stuff of a butterfly style. The graphics on this pad I think is honestly pretty disappointing, but they're very boring in my eyes, but they're also very clean. You do have like 6 pad zones, but I'm gonna grab the blocker to show this off of the zones themselves because I can't remember exactly how they work on this one. But basically you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So those are your zones. Interestingly enough, the blocker is on the opposite side as the pad. So you can see, you're trying to pull this down and get a kind of view of it. It doesn't match 1-to-1 with. I'm just not a huge fan of how you can't ever go the other way. So everything always goes in one direction and you're kind of stuck with that without anything kind of breaking it up or color blocking. It's all just straight up lines. But obviously that is not an important thing. So onto the face of the pad itself. And you see a very traditional style face here with the cord going through them, which a lot of companies have kind of pulled away from. That's not the case here, and you can see that all right there. Also have this knee roll, which is honestly very tiny and very thin and almost like non-existent. It's super tiny on the side, as you can see. You might as well at this point kind of take it off because it's not really doing a huge amount. And I wish that was really a full outer roll there because it does give a little bit more puck saving ability when it's out more and cuts down the angle a bit. And when we look on the inner sliding surface, we see some interesting things here, including, well, this knee block is very interesting, but we'll have to see it in a second. You see generally a pretty like traditional design here. It does have the one cut below the knee, but this is super soft above the knee too. So you can really see how much that pad moves from this side. And you do have a pretty dense foam all the way through. And you can see it kind of coming up here, going down here, and here as well. Good job of kind of pushing this binding kind of back a bit so it won't be on the sliding edge. Same with this one, you'll definitely get this piece before you get this piece. Down here is a little bit of another story. You can see how it's kind of blackened out because that is kind of on the sliding edge. So it would have been nice to see this regress down a bit, but there is some puck marks there as well. And we're going to talk about sliding right now since we're on this edge. Sliding on these pads was really interesting. The very first skate I got on these and got on them, they slid better than any pad I've ever worn, including the Vaughn SLR 3s or any Vaughn with quick slide. This slid better than them right away. Now, once the ice started getting chopped up in about 20 minutes of play, that sliding totally fell off a cliff and they became kind of standard Weave Gen Pro sliding. Then once I wore them again, right away, right on the ice, that really quick, crazy fast sliding that was the very first time I played went away and it wasn't repeatable. So I don't know if there was some sort of, I don't want to say spray, but like wax on here. I asked PGS, they said that no, there was nothing on there unless Kenesky put them on, and recall Kenesky ever doing that. So something on here, and maybe it was just the perfect ice conditions and made these things slide ridiculously well for about 20 minutes. Then they dropped to below about what you'd expect. So like right now for pads, it's basically, so Vaughn with quick slide, Warrior with plastic slide plate. From my experience, True's PX3s are sliding better than my Bauer ones, and then it's Bauer, and then it's kind of everything else, and this is under everything else. So it's actually below the weave that is on True PX3, just because the block design and how the pad, like this part all works, just slides better on the True pads than it does on these. And this wing also is kind of interesting because you can see how it's not really perpendicular. So when we look at the block like this actually does stick out a little bit. Now you could adjust this so it sticks back, but it's not a big deal. But this piece kind of goes the other way. So when you're actually laying flat, this piece actually kind of comes in a bit and you can see the gap right here. So interesting that this isn't totally flush and kind of sits back a little bit. We'll show later on how that performs in terms of seal and everything. On this though, you do also have this part for sliding with your foot kind of sitting on. And then we get to the boot, and it's super thin as well as super short. So you can see it right here. PGS and in turn Kenesky, who make these, are a very custom company where I'm sure you could request to have a longer boot here. On the toe, you have that binding all the way through, which is pretty standard. Like I mentioned earlier, a little disappointing this nylon isn't covered all the way because that is on the sliding edge and this is going to get wet. You can feel it and it's going to get worn out. So it would be nice for that coverage. And then you have the binding all the way around here and to this binding this outside edge right here. On the outside, we do again see that boot is super short, and even then this piece is like kind of misleading because it's just a binding piece and it doesn't really go that far down. But again, tiny boot, and for boot flex, it is pretty stiff. As you can see, it's not like the softest thing ever. So it's pretty stiff and hard to flex there. A really thick shin piece here, so a more traditional design here compared to a lot of other companies, but you still have a binding this over here, so it's kind of interesting how it's kind of a mix of the two. But all the way through, generally kind of thick compared to some other companies, but it's not like it is a thick design and it doesn't get in the way or anything, and it plays totally fine. Back to the toe piece right here and the boot. So you have their PGS straps, which I absolutely love. These are super simple to use, super easy, and I love these, and they're just like one of the better toe ties in terms of just making everything flat and making everything really easy. And to adjust these, it's also really easy because you just pull that out and adjust it. So simple, great, fine design. You have this foam bridge right here that holds it in. You can offset it or leave it straight. And then you do have this boot strap right here, which is an elastic design, as you can see, and it attaches right here. So I like the elastic part of this, and that is kind of good. A little disappointing. I wish this had the option to kind of have a piece here and here as well. There's not many companies doing that anymore, if any, where you can have it in both places. Obviously custom, so if you really wanted to heel, they could do it. This also works to heel if you want to. I put it underneath. I do wish this just like had that adjustability, but overall it's fine, and you can't really complain about that when other companies don't offer that as well. Looking at this boot design, it is pretty flat, but it still has a channel, where a lot of companies are just totally flat now. This one still has a bit of a channel to it. It is pretty steep, as you can see as well. This pad, I think, is a 34+1, and it definitely played like an older style 34+1. It was way smaller than my true 34+2, so it took a ton of adjustments to do, and they really don't fit me. Toe integration with the post is honestly like pretty bad because this piece right here is so short compared to like most pads. Whenever I tried to slide into the post, it was always blade, and I couldn't really get this very small margin, which is this, to really get the toe in there. So it was kind of tough in that sense. If you added more slack to the toe ties, it would help. Like you could just add that skate lace and it would help a bit, but this entire shape is basically really hard to get it in just like that. And the multiple skates I did with this on, I never once actually got the right toe right in there. It was always like this or like this, and there was always a gap there. Tough to do here. Obviously, the more use you do, you get used to it, but this was not easy and it took a lot of work to even get it close. Onto the inside, you can see the integration right there, and that little outer roll is tiny and the gap is pretty small right there, as you can see. And when we move into the shin, which is kind of harder to get at, you can see very tiny gap because of how small that roll is. So it really does hug that spot pretty well. So with how short this boot is, and this is obviously dependent on your skate size too, like I'm at 8.5, which isn't massive, the whole padding situation going, my toes always dragged on the ice. So me just sitting here right here, my toe is always on that ice. Now, you could always do something with that toe tie to kind of pull it up, so that'd be pressure on your ankles, but every time I slid, it would be like this, and my toes would be like sliding on the ice. I also had points when my steel was hitting the ice to drag, and so that was not the greatest either. And the thing about this boot, and I kind of talked about it a second ago where like my foot's sliding, but I want to talk about it here because you can really see the size of this. This will also depend on your skate size. So my 9 Bowers and my 8.5 Trues, I could tell my toe was kind of coming off really far and it was sliding and digging, like getting stuck on the ice. So it was frustrating and kind of annoying with that. Now I told PGS this and they said, well, we're going to change the boot shape so it's less angled, and I don't think that's really necessarily the issue. I'm okay with this angled boot. It's somewhat of a unique design or most other pads on the market, so I'd almost say keep this. You just have to extend this, so this has to go a little longer out. But again, if it's a custom company and you can give them their skate size, you can kind of adjust, you should be able to adjust that, but it should kind of go longer out, as well as this piece should kind of be like this whole block right here, or I should say wing, can do a bit more to support your ankle, to kind of keep your ankle off the ice. But because this is like pretty thin and there's not a ton of like padding here or things really keeping this part of your leg off, but instantly flops down here and is really close to the ice, and that also hurts in terms of your skate dragging on the ice because it is so kind of close to this edge. So either pulling this in or making this thicker, which I think the thickness would be a better idea, kind of pulling in here would keep your ankle kind of off the ice a bit and give you some more clearance there as well. So there is multiple options to go that route. This inner channel, you can see you have Gen Pro right here and then just nylon right here with their gray Nash right here, which feels like the same material that is on their blocker. And for the strapping, you have this interesting little pillow strap that has adjustable pieces right here. And then you have this right here that goes there. I'm a huge fan of this piece just because it does have this little nice Gen Pro tab. So it's easy to pull off and everything, and it looks solid and it works pretty well, and you can move it up or down however and wherever you want it. Obviously, you can even go down there and pull this one up there and it works. So this strapping is totally fine and causes no issues. It reminds me of a little bit of Brian's, and they have like this kind of inner pillow thing of Brian's too. But this is where I wish this kind of continued all the way down to, so it would help lift your ankle off the pad, and it is a lot smaller and kind of seems like it's a little bit of a kind of idea from the optic, but it doesn't totally execute the same way just because of how thin this is. And honestly, just with the way that this block works, it doesn't really, like, this is too thin and fine. It's just, it doesn't feel like it does a massive difference. Making that a little bit thicker and just longer would definitely help in that regards. Outer strap is just a nice Gen Pro through it, and a kind of internal foams, pretty standard stuff here. And then on this inner wing, they do have this piece right here. I'm assuming this is so if it like hits the ice maybe, but really it will be kind of pulled in like this. So maybe this is just a wear guard for right here. Interesting that it is there. And we open up in here. So we have a medium kind of density foam, not crazy hard, not crazy soft. You get a bit of stability with that, and just how it is designed through here with sewn right here. But the big part about this and kind of this whole design, and which really affects stability, is kind of how like far back this is, and you can see how it's regressed through here, but it also never really sits flat. I didn't tie this or do this tight at all. I basically did it at the loosest setting I could, which is basically like this, and you can see how it kind of pulls this back, and that was happening all the time. So when I would drop, the knee would be on the ice, but this piece right here would be off the ice, and I had very little stability overall. It was relying on basically all this and the knee, but there just wasn't enough stability overall in the pad, and it did feel like a lot more of an older style pad and not like a modern pad, which really goes for a lot of that stability in there and really keeping the sliding and everything really hard on the ice so you get like as little movement as possible. For pad seal over here, when you're just like not leaning, you can see it's pretty decent up here and bad down here. It's obviously that shape is what's going to cause that there. but when you go over here, even when you lean, it is pretty good. There's a tiny hole, but it's not a lot. So toe seal here is really good when you're leaning into the post. But then when you go over, you can see the thigh rise really come up, and with how soft that thigh rise is, pucks are gonna fling that. So you can see where that seal is here compared to down here. Down here is pretty good. For pad seal, there isn't like a ton of extra pillows or anything down here. It's really just your couple wings, but it wasn't awful. But the way these, I had to strap these, you can see it comes up really easy. So the whole pad kind of comes up off the ice like right away. So they're a lot more fitted kind of to your leg and not really going loose. That was for me, my strapping. Now, obviously if I did these a little looser, it would come off a little bit, but just the way this inner strap too, that's at its loosest setting, it does feel really kind of connected that way. For overall pad stability, it was honestly like one of the least stable pads I've used ever. For as long as I can remember. With the way that that wing is designed, like this calf wing, and how it never really sits flush, and you can see it in the game footage, you can see it when I show like the side. Moving around on here, this whole piece feels like it's like completely detached from your leg, and you can't really feel it ever. So when I was playing and trying to reach out and everything like that, this whole piece just felt like it was kind of going all over the place. Stability on the knee is okay. It's nothing crazy. It's pretty soft knee overall, like the design. But everything down here didn't really help. And with how shallow and like short that boot is, the pad really kind of rotates on you a lot. So like when I was trying to do anything in like play, I could really feel it moving like this a lot more than I was expecting. So they weren't very stable. And like even right now, I can feel a piece of foam kind of like up here, kind of getting in the way of my skate when I'm doing this. And it's not a super like stable overall thing. And when your like toe, you go to push off and stuff, you can see how the calf comes off the ice anytime you go to use your toe. So when I was trying to like push or stop too, or even just like sliding hard after a push, if I was up, came after a push, my toe was down, you could see how that calf is always up. And that was like the big thing with stability too, where I would make a hard push from my stance, come down, my toes would kind of still be contacted with the ice pushing, and this is all off the ice. So you can see where like that stability factor comes into play. Now when we get to the knee block, you have this piece here, which is a removable and adjustable knee wing, so it goes up and down. Has this little tab that is hard to undo, but unvelcros like this, and then you put the strap in here, and it has a two-sided Velcro piece, so it really doesn't pull out. So pretty solid design there. I like this a lot. Again, you have this Nash, which has a little bit of padding to it, but not a ton. And then for the inner block, so this is where PGS says that they have a triple density foam for the knee block, and for padding it says, and this is a bit where I'm like a little, I feel like that's almost misleading, because this piece shouldn't really count as a foam, but it does. And even this piece, like the only real padding part is right here, and these aren't super padded or super thick. You can see the thickness of there. It's like a soft thing, but these were not extremely comfortable to land on. I would prefer this to be a lot thicker than what it is, but we're going to open this up, and you can see that is where the strap goes, so it is adjustable. And you can see this knee block and the design here, and this is a foam as well, so it's not like a plastic, and it is, you can see, but it wasn't super soft and comfortable to land on, and it wasn't bad like some Vons I've used recently and even CCMs, but it wasn't the best. So I was kind of expecting a real more plush and thicker kind of landing surface here, but we didn't really get that. This design here reminds me a lot of Warrior, where you un-velcro these, and this piece comes off, and you can see where this piece is kind of attached into the pad. So you don't have a crazy stable block in there, but that's kind of fine. I have no real issues with that, but it does really come off. You can see like it really comes off the pad regardless of how you put this on, and it really moves regardless of how you put this on. You can see this one is a decent density and overall foam, and you can flex it a little bit. So when we line this totally straight, flatten that back on, wrap this around, wrap this around, and then put this piece back on, you get an idea of how much wiggle is in there, and there's a lot. And this is where like that new integrated block really helps in terms of stability, because a knee doesn't do this, but you don't need that integrated piece like Bauer and Vaughn kind of do now. True is an example where this is the same style of block, but it definitely moves less, and it feels a lot more stable on it, when this kind of just moves a lot more and is a lot less stable overall when sliding. The other big difference on this pad compared to this pad, and this is going to be really hard to get on camera, but hopefully we'll see it. You can see this is like kind of sloped. So it always felt like the inner side, like you can see it right there, the outer side is higher, so and it slopes inward. So I'm not sure why this is angled and sloped like that, but It is, and maybe this added to the stability of this block overall, but it wasn't, like I mentioned, the most stable block I use, and I really felt it moving on this pad versus like a pad like this, which feels super stable when you're using and is totally flat there. Now, I want to also call something out here, and I'm talking about stability on this pad and saying how it's not very stable, and I could really feel the pad and like my leg kind of moving and not being totally balanced on the ice while playing. And that is totally true. That is how I felt. It doesn't necessarily mean the pad is awful. What it means is it's a different style of pad for people. Now, there are tons of people who still love that more old style feel where everything is really tight and the pad kind of flexes really with you, kind of like a Vaughn Velocity, let's go V4, maybe even V5 type thing, where like this is all tight to you. The calf wraps with you. You've seen this in tons of NHL goalies in the past, like Jonathan Quick, where this kind of wraps tighter to you. So you do have the less stability, but you can move around a lot more. I'm not going to say more agile because you have a ton of agile goalies, but it just feels like it gets out of the way a lot more than those pads with more stable and stiffer pieces through here. So this is definitely a pad that definitely works better for that type of goalie who kind of wants that. Now, I don't necessarily think it's the way of the future goaltending, but it's still definitely a market, especially in the beer league segment where people are older than in their 20s and older than me. I'm 33 and I'm kind of younger in the beer league world. So even then, still has a market for it and a purpose. So people who want a pad that doesn't feel as blocky and everything, this is might be a solid design, might be a solid choice for them there because of how that overall feels. Finally, we move on to the top of the pad and we have just a very blank and empty overall design, which is totally fine. It's just a nylon back here with, it seems like a wear guard of Gen Pro back here, which I like because these will kind of overlap if you have that stance, and this will help with the overlap there and the wear there. So nothing crazy here. You also still have a binding up here, unlike some other companies which are all bindingless, so interesting there. And then that binding is hidden on the outside. Now for core stiffness, this was actually very impressive on this pad. So you can see across the face, and we did the thigh rise test with this, which if you haven't watched, go watch it. But the core stiffness is pretty stiff. It's not the softest pad in the world. It's also not the stiffest pad in the world, but it's pretty solid overall, and it is probably going to hold up pretty well. And that is a pretty solid core stiffness. Like I said, it's not the most extreme, but it's pretty good. And the thigh rise test and the results of the thigh rise test weren't because of that core stiffness. It's all because of the breaks here, and you can really see that pad bend like that. Torsional flex on this as well. It doesn't the pad flexes, right? So you can see how much this moves on you and how like soft the overall core and stuff is. So you do have quite a bit of torsional flex there, but even like I showed how much this pad kind of moves with you with your toes going everywhere. So the flex on it is pretty big compared to a lot of other pads, especially when you got like Bauer with the locked in calf wings. This moves a lot more than what that does. So it's a lot different style of and feeling of pad. Now on to the rebounds of this pad, which are pretty decent. They weren't Bauer crazy, but they were pretty decent overall. They felt kind of similar to an SLR, maybe a little bit better than my SLR 3s in terms of rebounds, which is pretty solid. And I'm just going to punch this so you can kind of hear it. And this is where PGS told me that they had a specific foam that they use in here for better rebounds than what like Kenesky has. So I'm not sure what that foam is, but that happened in one of our conversations. But the rebounds on it were pretty solid overall, and I was pretty happy with them. It's again not Bauer or anything like crazy like that. So weight and balance on these pads is honestly, it's very good. They do feel very light. It's pretty light all over. No matter where you grab them from and pick them up from, they do feel light in your hands, and overall is pretty good in that regard. So I confirmed the pricing with PGS on this, and these pads do retail for $2,299.99. And I say that with a bit of a sadness because that's a lot of money for this pad, where the blocker and catcher had a bit of room in there in terms of like compared to the retail big brand lines. This one is actually costs more than the Hyperlight 2s if you bought that stock. These are also more expensive, I think, than true 20.1s made in Canada. Pad prices are going up. I think eFlex 6 are slightly more expensive than this, and so pad prices are going up, and this one might stay around there. But regardless, at this time, it's a really hard price point to be at for what this pad offers and for this pad in general. And it has to be said, when you know this gear is made by another manufacturer, so Kenesky, which you can go on Kenesky's website and get a set of pads for I think $1,500 or $1,550 Canadian-ish when this video was being filmed, and you know that these are made by Kenesky, that makes this really hard to justify that over $500 gap between that pad and this pad. Now, the reasoning is they use a specific foam in here that is more expensive, and they have a few, like they use certain materials that are more expensive, as well as because it's someone selling a Kenesky product, obviously there has to be some margins in there. But from a consumer standpoint, this pad and that price makes it really hard to justify looking at this pad because simply it doesn't really offer all that much more than other companies, or more at all than other companies. The foam in here, like, it is nice and sturdy, like I talked about, while still being pretty light, and it feels pretty solid. And like, it did pretty decent on the thigh rise test in terms of like the actual core itself. Obviously with the internal brakes, it's not going to perform that great for that test, but the actual core itself wasn't like flexing inwards, right? So that's the important part for that. That is a nice thing. There's nothing else on here that performed better than other companies. I love when companies are trying to do something slightly different. I like people doing their own takes on things. Like, I like how PGS is using different foams and has a few different idea tweaks. Like the cuff on here was a whole PGS design, which is a very interesting design, and I like it. I don't think it's totally necessary, but if you like this really tight, it does work, and it's an interesting design. I like seeing stuff like this, but overall it's really hard for me to say, yeah, you need to drop like this money and recommend people on this, because basically every pad I've used in the last 5-6 months has done something better than this. Unfortunately, just isn't something I think is easily recommendable, so I can't just say, hey, yeah, you guys should definitely grab these pads. I still think that this pad kind of suits a certain goalie though, and I think this foam core in here and how flexible this is while still giving off pretty good rebounds and still having a generally solid core here, like this will work for a lot of beer league goalies. Not that I'm not a beer league goalie, but I know a lot of beer league goalies that are wearing gear that just doesn't work for their game whatsoever. I have few goalies that are my goalies in leagues are wearing like really stiff Premier pads that are way too big for them, or just like stiff pads that just don't work and they never can close their 5-hole, and it just like it's rough. It's rough watching it. These would work so much better for them just because these are way softer. They'd be able to move a lot more in them. I don't think the stability is really something that they would worry about. How this is all made would be a benefit to them, because this will kind of move with their leg movements more, and their movements aren't sliding cross crease and doing RVH and kind of leaning on your ankles as much as it is kind of more of shuffling and just kind of trying to get in the way as much as possible. So type of goaltending for something like this would probably work a lot better for those type of goalies. So I think this pad definitely has a market, but I think it's priced out of the market, unfortunately. Hopefully that these demos can be worn by people and people can try them out. It wasn't just like I got lucky because of I review gear, because I think if people try these out and they really like them, then obviously that will push people in that direction, and having demos available for that is a huge bonus for allowing people to see if they'll like something. So hopefully that is a thing, and hopefully people can test this, and then hopefully PGS's claims for customer service and everything can justify that price difference as well as that internal materials in there. So that brings us to the conclusion of this review for the set and the pad specifically. Thank you very much for watching. Once again, huge thanks to PGS for sending me this whole set to do a review on. It's probably not exactly what they wanted to hear, but I have to give my honest feedback. I hope someone sees this pad in this design and says, yeah, that will really work for me, and reaches out to PGS and wants like to demo them and try them, and hopefully that will work for them. But anyways, that's about it for this video. Thank you very much for watching. Let me know in the comments if you want me to review a specific piece of gear, and also let the companies know on social media if you want me to review a specific piece of gear. Usually I have to buy sets unlike this, which I got really lucky on to doing a demo. That costs money, so we greatly appreciate it. Remember to subscribe to me on YouTube, follow me on Instagram and TikTok. Links are in the description. If you're purchasing hockey equipment anyways and you live in Canada, United States, check out the links in the description. If you're in Canada, it's Hockey Supremacy. If you're in the US, to Pure Hockey. Clicking those links, making a purchase gives me a kickback so I can make more content and doing more reviews. Otherwise, check out Patreon, buy me a coffee. Everything through there always comes back into the channel so I can keep making more content and doing more videos. Thank you very much for watching, and take it easy.
You're watching HockeyReviews.ca.